Okay, just going to show very quickly. I did decide with the Allies to do a naval move with both the Commonwealth and the French to try to contest the Med. The Russians did their neutral and they just kind of shuffled some units around, really not a big deal there. Just to speak quickly to what they did is the Commonwealth put out some units to guard some of their convoy spaces, as well as just create some blockage here so that we can maintain our supply line into the Med. So they're doing that. They can do that in strength. We did send some Commonwealth units out, along with the French, distributed their fleet. They took the advantage of multiple naval moves to try to just cover the entire Med and basically ding the Italians and wear them down. But unfortunately, when it came to the search rolls, both sides missed each other here, and over here the Italians actually got the advantage and damaged a Commonwealth cruiser, which I believe is going to keep them from getting supply. I'm going to have to double check that because right now the Allied supply situation for the Commonwealth can reach Malta because now they have surface vessels here. They can get to Malta, but I will have to look to see if the French can provide supply to the coast. That's going to depend on what the Commonwealth can do next impulse to try to move into a coastal hex and be back in supply. The only problem will be they'll have to move and flip because they're currently out of supply. And when you move while out of supply, you will flip. So there's an attempt made to try to save these units, but I just don't see it happening now. We were hoping to ding the Italians, but the search rolls just didn't come up, rolling high for each side, even with naval units, naval bombers, I should say, in there helping the search rolls. It wasn't enough. So, yeah, kind of a tough call. Ended up not working as good. The intent was to try to clear the eastern Med of the Italians if we could force a decent combat, and then sort of work our way back westward with all these guys out of supply. But just didn't work out, and I was hoping we'd snipe the convoys over here, being in the 4-box, but we didn't hit that either, which is a real bummer. The Italians almost caught them with their nav, but just they didn't. It's not good enough. I rolled a 5, which is just a little too high for the naval bomber there. So I don't know. The Italians are sweating a little bit because of that. This is kind of a dangerous situation. They're kind of hoping the turn ends early, but the weather's great, so we'll see what happens. So I'm going to double check the supply thing, and then we'll come back. Okay, real quick, in just regards to these units, so checking the rule book with the latest errata. Because the French and the Commonwealth do not cooperate, then the French ships will not supply those Commonwealth units down there. Now this will change post Vichy declaration potentially if the navy of the French goes to Free France. If they're able to get after we collapse Vichy and the fleet becomes Free French, then they could. But for now they can't. They weren't prepared to provide supplies. The ship we put in the 4-box was supposed to do that with the French fleet there, basically flying cover, or sailing cover, I guess that would be the way to look at it. But that didn't work, so the Commonwealth is still in a tough situation. They're going to lose the east side of the map, basically, and it doesn't win the game for the Axis, but it helps a whole lot. So that's it, really, for the Allies there. Not a whole lot that we could count on helping out. We're going to go to the Axis now, Axis Impulse, and I'm going to roll weather, and we'll see what we get. Rolled a 6, so we are on September, October, so it is rain in the Arctic, fine everywhere else that matters for the game at the moment, but the box will shift to as we go, 2 boxes, so that'll help end the turn a little bit early. The Axis has an opportunity to take some actions here. Now the tough thing will be, again, deciding for the Germans, do they want to keep pressuring France to see how well they could pull off a conquering of France, or do they just want to take care of the Vichy, in which case they can hold their line and probably send out their subs to do some sub-rating. That might be something they could opt to do. Kind of tough to say. The Italians have a dastardly plan of their own plan, but I think I am going to be missing some of the important activity limits that I really wanted to have to be able to do all the things I wanted to do this turn. So we'll see. I'll take care of most of the action off camera. When we come back, we'll see what occurred. Okay, so for the Axis, a couple of things I've been meaning to do for a long time, and I just haven't done it. The Axis align Hungary and Bulgaria. Again, this is a function of the allowing of the Romanian Bessarabia region to go to the Soviet Union, and then also giving Transylvania from Romania to Hungary and South Dobruja to Bulgaria allows Germany to align those two countries. We want to align Romania as well, but we have to wait until France is either conquered or Vichy is declared. So basically we have to finish up France before we can get Romania locked in. I do have their units over here. Again, you can sort of ignore that if you're really paying attention to it. They're just there kind of for convenience, but Hungary and Bulgaria are in. Their future units are going to be in the German force pool. All is hunky-dory there, so Middle Europa sort of getting established, that kind of action. I had to make a tough decision as the Italians. Because the French fleet are still such a force right now, I was hoping to do some sneaky invasion stuff, but then I realized that my air transport doesn't have the range that I thought it did. I thought it had a 9 range. It in fact only has a 6 range, so I really screwed that up. So what I ended up doing was, the Allies tried to do opponent's naval combat, and nobody found each other except for over here, where we had a naval air combat against the 4-box of the British, and we managed to send one of the British ships to port via an abort, but otherwise we didn't find each other, and so basically things are pretty stagnant. Some movement around the isolated Commonwealth units. I tried to ground strike him, and I missed, so the Commonwealth units are still there. They still got strength. We got to flip them, but they can't attack, so there's that. And then we moved a Italian unit up the coast. So basically Palestine and trying to see, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Palestine, Jordan, and Syria are all going to be conquered by Italy this turn, so that'll be nice and cleaned up. And then the other thing we did, and this sort of gets into what Germany's doing, is we got a naval transport. We managed to avoid being intercepted here and here. This was very risky. And we landed in Tripoli, and now we're starting to move a armored corps into Tunisia. Now that unit's currently out of supply, but the next Axis impulse we're going to send ships into the Western Med to create the supply line, and then this guy's going to race up and capture Tunis, and we'll basically effectively taken one more country from France, with the idea we're going to push into Algeria as far as we can, hopefully before the end of the turn. But that's the idea anyway. I'm not sure how far we'll get. We'll have to see what happens. And then for the Germans, basically they surrounded some units and forced them to retreat, which were eliminated via blitz. And we're just sort of moving down. We took Vichy proper just to try to see if we can get into some of these other factory hexes before the end of the turn. I don't think we're going to be able to do it, but we're just creating a situation where the French are losing their ability to react to what we're doing. We're cleaning up. Just make it easy that way. I didn't do anything that was risky. No point in risking any German units. But technically, the combat I had here would have been risky. But I chanced it just to help kind of clear the road, and we'll keep operating. See if we can knock out this garrison. And I didn't take Vichy. I took Lyon. My bad. But some of this stuff is going to get cleared up here at the end of the turn anyway. So Axis is done. We move up 2 boxes, then the Allies are going to go again. Okay, so I very quickly took care of the rest of the turn. Managed to get the turn to end, but played through a little bit. I didn't record all of it. It was easier to play through and talk to it afterwards unless something very significant was going on. So basically we had some Allied activity followed by Axis, and then the Allies ended it by passing because they pretty much ran out of gas. You can see in France, the only counters left for the French are a turned face-down fighter that's going to get overrun and destroyed, or would have if we had another impulse. One garrison in Vichy, and then these 2 units that were down in the south guarding the border with Italy. We had, we had some fights here in the Mediterranean, some combat, and really did not ultimately go well for the Allies. I'll just go ahead and say I think the Allies, just on all the die rolls of the game, outside of naval stuff, they've been mostly okay. But for whatever reason in the Mediterranean, just every time I roll dice, they don't do very well at all. And they ended up getting forced out of the Western Med, mostly due to aborts. There were some damaged Commonwealth units that were sent to the repair pool. And really importantly, the French carrier, which was attempting to shoot down the Italian naval bomber here, they didn't have a tremendous advantage, but they did have an advantage, but the Italian bombers were actually able to outfight the carriers on the aircraft carrier, and they lost. The carrier was basically rendered without planes, so you put a no planes marker on the carrier, and it just got to the point where the Allies had to bug out, because otherwise we were likely going to see the aircraft carrier get destroyed, which I guess wouldn't have been so bad. I mean, they could have stuck around, but the whole point of this was to try to contest, and at this point that naval bomber just having enough dominance of protecting the sea, forcing every combat basically to be naval air, just planked away at the Allied units, and every time there was surprise points in the Italians' favor, I mean, they were using it to reduce the anti-air and just doing enough to ward off rather the Allies. In the Eastern Med, it basically got to a standstill. We couldn't find each other, so the majority of the big French fleet with a lot of their better cruisers and battleships basically couldn't find the Italians and vice versa. So both were trying to cause some combat to occur, but just didn't show up. And then finally, they tried to find over here, ended up kicking out one of the French units back to port, or maybe I damaged one, I can't remember. Again, due to that air power just being so key, the French, at times were close to being able to just target that convoy, but the nav just has that advantage of being treated as if they were in a higher sea box because of being, nav bombers. There's a bonus for that, and they were able to match finding the French cruisers, and then again that's our good naval bomber, better than the one in the Western Med. And the Allies tried to make something happen, and they just couldn't. The dice just wouldn't let them. And so it's that sort of reason. I'm just saying bluntly that I think this game, not due to imbalance of the game, but just imbalance to really poor luck, I think the game has just really shifted hard for the Axis, at least when it comes to naval matters down here. Much more than you would probably find in a regular game. I mean, or when I say regular game, I mean, I guess just any old average game. This is definitely an above average showing for the Axis. And if you're watching this and let me know what you guys think, but I would just warn, if you're a newbie watching this, I wouldn't expect this kind of performance from Italy ordinarily at all. I'm really surprised that it's turning out this well for them. I'm taking some risks and it's paying off, but I'm just surprised at the way the dice are going. So Malta's still out of supply, and the French are going to basically lose what's left, because, I mean, at this point, I mean, over here you can see like the Germans are kind of pushing through. They could keep trying to push through the rest of France and conquer it outright, but that's going to take more time, and I don't see the point. It might simply be easier declare Vichy, collapse it next turn, and then just continue to move through. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. Down in North Africa, we did, because we had our supply opened up, we managed to get the German sort of Panzer Corps down here, which again is in supply on the coast because it cooperates with Italy, and they can, trace supply to Italian cities basically. Is operating somewhat independently, but able to snake up around Tunis, and basically Tunisia will have been conquered. Now that I'm mentioning conquering stuff, this Italian motorized corps took a little tour and basically captured what is it? Amman in Jordan, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Damascus, and Syria. So all three of those allied countries are going to be conquered by the Italians this turn, which means they're going to get the Iraq oil trade that would normally go to France, or it will once we declare Vichy, basically. But because the Italians control Syria, they'll get those resources. So there's going to be a point now where we'll have some additional convoys in the Eastern Med for the Italians, because basically they're going to get some additional resources. Technically, the Commonwealth still has Cyprus, but no big deal there. The key thing is we still have these Commonwealth units that are out of supply that just can't get supply restored, but at the same time they're dug in, in a way they're dug in. The Italians just don't have enough power to knock them out yet. We've got to flip them out of supply, and I just haven't been able to sufficiently suppress them to that state. But we're hopefully going to be able to close that up here in some time. And we could even make that faster if the Germans decided to lend a bomber, but that's just not really what's going down. Everywhere else, the Commonwealth is trying to do what they can just to cover the seas, to prepare for the fights to come. And I guess it's going to be after this end of turn phase where the Allies kind of will start to realize what the Axis strategy is. We do have Hungary and Bulgaria in. Their units are set up. They've been called in. I think I mentioned that in the last clip. So things are sort of formulating into shape a little bit. I need to decide, am I going to do anything with Yugoslavia? Am I going to attack into Yugoslavia, for instance? Is there any point to doing that? Or am I going to move those units east and get set up for our defense against Russia while we are busy in the west? I've been told online that really you want to be trying to do landings even in 40 if you can do it. We want to be pushing on all fronts, but we have to kind of get through the Vichy stuff first. So we're at the end of turn phase. I'm going to start to do the end of turn stuff, but when we get to the Vichy rules, we'll kind of slowly work our way through it. So I'll put a cut here. I'll take care of partisans, U.S. entry, return to base, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Vichy stuff. Well, I guess Vichy doesn't happen until after production, so I'll just take care of all of that stuff. I'll talk to it very quickly when we come back, and then we'll start looking at the Vichy. Okay, so I went and took care of a lot of the end-of-turn stuff, so just a couple of things. There weren't any partisans of consequence that came onto the board. Possibly the Netherlands, but the Germans have it well garrisoned. With U.S. entry, the U.S. drew very poorly. They only got a 1 chit, while Germany got decent chits. Soviet Union got an okay chit. And it led to at first, the U.S. entry action to be chosen for the turn was basically none. I didn't have enough U.S. entry to actually pick something that was in play or usable. What I ended up doing was, after production, I realized that I forgot to do the U.S. entry roll for Italy taking control of the Suez Canal, which is U.S. entry and almost guaranteed to get a chit. The U.S. did, then I drew it, and it was enough to give them up to 18 total, basically 9 chit value doubled to 18. I looked, what I probably should have done was chosen U.S. entry, I think it's like 17, which allows Britain to build some naval units more cheaply. But I had already done production, and I didn't want to redo it. So I'll choose that option next turn, assuming we have the points for it. And instead I chose U.S. entry option 18, which is occupying the Azores, which is right here. And so the idea with that particular option is that either basically 3 different cases allow us to trigger something, but we had to have taken the option first way ahead of time, and so we've done that. But basically later in the game, if Gibraltar or Madrid are Axis controlled, then the US can take control of the Azores and put units there. Or if it's 1943, we can do the same thing. So while we took the option, the US doesn't control the Azores, but when the time comes, basically we'll be able to do so. And that's really what enables in World in Flames our ability to do like Operation Torch a little more convincingly over here, because basically, you know, trying to go all the way from the U.S. to North Africa, like, you know, where they landed in Oran over here. I mean, you can't really do it from the U.S. directly, which I think is how historically they did. I'm not sure the American amphibious units or transports have enough range for that to happen and to do so, you know, decently. But what you can do is you can instead use the Azores as a jumping off point, I think, is how that ultimately works. Maybe the Azores were used in the real history. I'll have to look at that. I'll have to look it up. I'm not really sure. But it will be important, because then we can put you know, planes there potentially. We can it's a minor port, so we can at least get some transports there and then use them. So going from there to here is a lot easier than going all the way from the United States. So we have a much easier time getting into the Med as the ally. So that's what we're doing there. The U.S. entry, again, occupying the Azores. Technically, it doesn't happen now, but it enables us to do it at those trigger points. So that's done. Then very quickly for production, I just want to talk through this very, very quick. I completed all the production. It's all pretty straightforward stuff. The U.S. is looking to finish building the Hornet aircraft carrier, so this is just going to stay on the turn track for a year, and then we'll get that. The British are doing a couple of things. They're building a mechanized infantry, which is unfortunately the Indian mechanized infantry, which means it's going to be much harder for us to get it in areas of importance, but at least it's a very strong unit, very powerful. So that'll go 3 slices up. Then we're going to repair the Warspite. I think I've heard it pronounced Warspite somewhere. Maybe those people were saying it wrong. But it's the Warspite to me, which is going to be repaired in 2 turns. So we'll get that out of the repair pool. And then the Commonwealth is also going to work on finishing this amphibious landing craft. They'll need that to go back on the offensive at some point. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then finally, the British are also looking to finish building the King George V battleship, which will be a year from now, just to get it built out of the build pool. The thing is, you know, the Commonwealth have taken enough naval hits that, you know, it makes sense to try to keep building some more Navy, and just kind of knowing that it's going to be useful no matter what we do, no matter what the Axis does, it'll be useful. The French are kind of in a tough spot. They don't have a lot of options that they can do. Basically, they're about to fall apart due to the Vichy rule, but there's still production before Vichy. So they built a infantry unit, kind of a basic one, 5.4, and then they're building some militia. So 3 militia. One ended up being the Senegalese one in Dakar. So nothing too crazy here, but I think what's going to really matter is how this is all going to play out for the Vichy declaration. So some of those units are just going to be Vichy units when they get built, or may or may not be built at all. I mean, it's just going to be hard however we want to look at it. It might have been wasted build points. I tried asking online like what to do here as the allies, and it's really hard. There's not a camera screwed up as I was talking. So there you go. I just stupid camera. I hate it. But anyway, the whole idea being, you know, a lot of the stuff that you're building, even in the last turn, you know Vichy is possibly going to be declared. What do you build? Someone pointed out, well, you could build militia, and in the case where, you know, the Axis decides not to declare Vichy, then at least you have militia in the remaining cities. You can kind of make it a harder gamble for them to try to conquer France outright. So that's what we did. We'll see how well it works out. For the Soviet Union, they built a garrison, they built an HQ, a fighter, and another fighter. So they're kind of, they've built a lot of infantry. They're going to get more free infantry eventually. It made sense to me to build a little bit more tech stuff while we can. And that was kind of a relatively straightforward decision to make. We'll keep building more garrisons, more infantry over time. We wanted to get a couple of these guys out. The HQs were useful, so I want to make sure we get those going. And then for the Axis, which didn't have a huge amount of stuff to do, the Italians have built a fighter and a bomber, so just reinforcing some of their air power. It's something they're lacking right now besides their naval bombers. We're going to get that going for them. And then for Germany, they built some bombers. They built a bomber just to get some bombers back on the board. They're building the Rommel HQ, so I had 2 HQs. I've managed to pull Rommel, which is a little bit better than the other one, just because it's white print and helps when it's out of supply. He's an armored HQ, which helps as well there, and then another air transport, just so we have plenty of air in case one of our airplanes gets shot down for Britain when that time comes, right? So, pretty straightforward stuff there, nothing too crazy. And that's it for production. So we have these guys being built. We'll be heading into the November-December turn here very shortly. And now we're going to get into the peace conquest phase. So I think I talked to this a little bit in the other parts of the video, but just kind of calling out a few things. So what's going to change here is that Syria was conquered by Italy. Palestine was conquered by Italy. Jordan was conquered by Italy. We already had Egypt conquered by Italy. These poor guys out here are still hanging on. Over in Tunis, Tunisia was conquered by Germany, technically, who have an armor corps kind of racing across the coast of North Africa. So Tunisia. Algeria is still French-controlled. Morocco is still French-controlled as of this step, where we're just talking about conquest phase. Now we're going to get to the Vichy declaration phase. So all that stuff happens first. So Tunis being conquered, that happens before Vichy. All this other stuff happens before Vichy. But now we get to this. And in the peace phase, after Vichy comes liberation and surrender, if any of those things matter. But here, we're now going to get into the thick of things, and really the bulk of the rest of this video is talking through Vichy. So I'm going to put a pause here and kind of get myself calm, cool, and collected, and then we'll start walking through the Vichy procedures. This is kind of a complicated part of the game. It's a real kind of shame to have to deal with it, but it's a complicated real-life situation that the game tries to simulate. We'll walk through it as carefully as we can, and I'll try to do it in a way that will help you do it in your games if you're unfamiliar and a new player as well. So this video will probably be named like, Vichy Mechanics or something, or 1940 Vichy, something like that. All right, we'll be back. Okay, so let's talk Vichy. First thing we got to look at is the rules section of 17 in the rulebook. So if you're going to follow along, you'll want to reference that. I'm going to use my in-print rulebook for most of this, though I may check the rules PDF at the latest errata just to ensure I don't miss anything along the way. But an Axis major power may choose to install a Vichy government during any peace step if it occupies Paris with more land combat factors than any other Axis major power, check. It is not at war with the USA, check. And France is not conquered, check. If you install a Vichy government, the French home country is divided into 2 home countries. Vichy France, south of the border marked on the map, which runs the dotted red line here through there. If you ever looked at a map of World War II France after the fall of France, you have a pretty good idea what that shape looks like. So there's the Vichy France south of that border, and then occupied France, which is north of that border. The capital of Vichy France is the city of Vichy. Paris remains the capital of occupied France. So the unit here is covering up Vichy, but that is the city of Vichy there. Occupied France is a conquered major power home country controlled by the Axis major power that installed the Vichy government. Relatively straightforward stuff there. Control of occupied France is per the conquering rules, except that all hexes controlled by French units become controlled by the Axis major power, installing the Vichy government. So, basically, we're going to get ownership of all of occupied France here, the northwestern part of France, regardless of if there are French units in those spaces, even though at the moment there's just one poor little fighter. I was thinking through, like, oh, are we going to keep pushing? Are we going to do Vichy or not? I think I'm just going to do Vichy, because if I'm recording this video, sure, it's a fun side gig of doing a classic game of WiF. I might as well just do this so I'm familiar with the process rather than skirt around it. So I'm not going to try to just conquer France outright. We are doing Vichy here. So even with French units in them, we still gain control of all of those hexes. And they become controlled by Germany, because they are the Axis faction installing Vichy. Vichy France is the home country of a new neutral major power, Vichy, run by the Axis major power that installed it, Germany. All hexes in Vichy France are now controlled by Vichy. Okay, so everything down here, controlled by Vichy. Makes sense, right? Free France is an alternative government also established at this time. Free France is considered an incompletely conquered major power from now on, unless otherwise specified. It is run by the French player, and unless otherwise stated, all references to France include Free France. Free France starts at war with all countries France was at war with, and at peace with all others, including Vichy. French territories and minor countries already conquered by the Axis remain conquered by them. All other French-controlled territories and minor countries may become controlled by either Vichy or Free France. And that gets into 7.2, determining control, so we're going to end up doing some die rolling to determine, of all the areas left on the map that France had control of before this, which direction will they go. I do want to point out probably just the one thing again. That means, like, Tunisia is Axis controlled. So we control these hexes, we control that city, we can get supply through the ports and everything. Excuse me. That's all good, but we didn't get Algeria. I really wanted to, and it turned out I just didn't have the activity limits in the range of some of my units to do it, and the French sending out their fleet to kind of disrupt Mediterranean operations kept me from getting into these places. So now they're potentially going to be Vichy, which means I can't go into them unless I violate Vichy's existence, which is probably what we're going to do anyway, but just so we have that level of context. Okay, so in 17.2 there is a chart. Looking at that chart, we're going to roll a die on it for each of the administration groups to determine who controls it. A group becomes controlled by the Free French player if the roll is within the range shown on this chart. Otherwise, it remains controlled by Vichy. And so we're going to look at doing that. Some of this is going to be a little easier because we don't have any of the Pacific territories in the game because we're playing Europe only, so we're going to kind of skip over those. I don't know what really happens if we were to, like, roll it for them anyway and it would be Free France controlled or something. It doesn't really matter. There's nowhere for them to go, so we'll probably just ignore that. Now there is on the chart a -2 from each die roll if any on-map French CV or battleship is not in a French home country port. And so what I probably should have done is I should have made the French battleship go home. And in fact, I'm going to just do a quick correction because I think I meant to do that and I simply forgot. So I think we had 2 battleships that were out at sea, and so they'll go. We would have returned them to base, I guess. It kind of doesn't matter for this. It's just one of those things like, yeah, there was no cost to me doing that, and I just forgot to do it. So there are other French units out at sea that I left out there. kind of for no purpose other than illustrative as we go through this Vichy process, but we'll say they would have gone home. So there's no -2. So we're going to roll for Corsica, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. So this group, which is, essentially the Western Mediterranean, the only way that Free France will control is if I roll a 10. I rolled a 6. So basically, just Corsica is Vichy, Morocco is Vichy, Algeria is Vichy. Tunisia has been conquered by the Axis, so they don't matter. So there you go. So the whole Western Med is now Vichy controlled, which means not allied, but at the same time, and we'll get into this in a little bit, that the Axis just can't go marching through Vichy France territory. So it kind of makes it just a neutral territory for the moment. Something to keep in mind. Then we have French West Africa, which is, we need a 9 or a 10. I rolled a 2, so French West Africa is actually Vichy as well. Syria was conquered, so they don't matter. Indochina may not matter. Madagascar probably doesn't matter. We'll roll just for the sake of it. Rolled a 3, so if Madagascar matters, because I think Madagascar shows up in the transfer pool picture, Madagascar is Vichy controlled. All the Asian map and territories aren't really relevant here. We do have French Equatorial Africa, which is a 3 to 10. So I'm going to roll the die. It could be that this goes Vichy, but will probably be Free French. And I rolled a 3, which is enough. And it's a good thing we put the carrier and the battleship back. So French Equatorial Africa is Free French. So what does that really mean? It's this area down here. You can see the red is kind of hard to read. French Equatorial Africa, Cameroon, mid-Congo. So those two areas down there. Not super valuable territory. There's no resources, but technically that is Free France. Yeah, French Equatorial Africa. Pacific map, territories, nothing to roll there for us. And then the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia, that's pretty far out and away. The only other thing then being all other minors and territories. I don't think we actually have any other minors or territories that would be impacting here. So if I look at that and I just take stock of the rolls and kind of where we're at with all of this, it seems like for the Free French capital is going to have to be, basically in Cameroon or mid-Congo. Let me look on the North American. I guess there's territories of Martinique, French Guyana. We probably need to roll for French Guiana. So roll 9 or a 10. Nope. Okay, so technically French Guiana is Vichy controlled. It's in South America. So I'm looking over here at the South America map. There's really not a whole lot of other areas for us to really roll on. Does Martinique? What's Martinique? Martinique Island is Vichy. Not that it matters. I mean, it gives. It's a neutral port, I guess, but that's about it. And just looking, everything else is just kind of non-relevant. So functionally for the game, France is kind of out, and the only thing that they hold on to are these minor countries in Africa, and that's going to be, I believe, where we have to call out their new home country. Okay, so moving through this rules section, so any Axis-controlled hexes in Vichy-controlled minor countries revert to Vichy control. So had we gotten into Algeria, it wouldn't have mattered. Those hexes would go back to being controlled by Vichy. If the countries were Free French and we were making progress in a Free French country, then we would have gotten to retain it. So in some ways, it might have been even better, honestly, if these had stayed Free France. We might have been, and we were actually getting into here, that might have been better for the Axis. They could have kept going. All Allied-controlled hexes in Free French-controlled minor countries immediately revert to Free French control. Sort of the inverse here, all Allied-controlled hexes in Vichy-controlled minor countries would immediately revert. If they choose not to revert, then the Allies are hostile with Vichy, or Vichy is hostile with the Allies. But really, right now, none of that really matters. Nothing takes effect. We've all kind of kept to our own borders up to this point. Finally, all Vichy-controlled minor countries France has gained control of since the start of the game immediately become controlled by any active Axis major power nominated by the major power installing Vichy. Minor country is conquered if it was aligned to France, and aligned if it was conquered. And there's no real case for that here because France didn't conquer anywhere, and that just didn't really affect anything. We didn't have any countries aligned to France by design because we just knew there'd be issues where Germany would automatically get to conquer it. So no biggie there. Free France must now choose one of its remaining aligned minor countries that it controlled in 1939 as its new home nation. If Free France controls no such minor territory, all Free French territories become Vichy-controlled. But we do have a couple countries that we can pick. We can pick between Cameroon and Congo. I guess we'll pick Cameroon. So we're going to have our new interim capital be here in Cameroon, with the capital further back into the jungles of Central Africa. And that will be, that's the new Free French home country. They're operating out of Africa. I think something similar to that happened in history, so there you go. It might have been in Senegal. I can't remember now off the top of my head. I feel bad. Okay. So there you go. So that much is done. The determining control. Keep in mind, we haven't moved anything yet. Everything is still here. We're just going through the logistics of what is going to be Vichy, what is not going to be Vichy, what is going to be conquered, what's going to be Free France. And we figured all of that out. And now it's going to be messing about with units. So this is going to be 17.3 of the rules. Once we're done with this section, Vichy will be set up. There are carry-on, rules about, how do you use Vichy, how you can collapse Vichy, what's their production like, and so on. But that, the important bits for the rest of the Vichy setup are going to be this next section, which is a little involved. So just a heads up there. So the first thing of 17.3 points to, every non-French controlled land and aircraft unit in a Vichy-controlled hex, country, or territory is now placed on the production circle to arrive as a reinforcement in 2 turns. So this is actually kind of a bummer because we have some German units that I threw out there. This is probably dumb. This is going to be like the lessons learned. I have 2 infantry and a motorized, and so now they have to go as reinforcements to come back in 2 turns, which kind of sucks. It's annoying, yeah, but understandable, right? Okay, so they took care of that. So Germany's out of Vichy France right now. The owner then rebases every non-French controlled naval unit in these territories or minor countries to the nearest friendly port. Okay, we don't have any of that, so that's easy. Yeah, so we just skip past that part. So if there were any, for some reason, German ships in port or whatever, they would have to go home to a friendly port up to double their range. That easy, we can resolve that. And then we get into French unit and markers. So this is where things get a little more complex. Alright, so looking at 17.3.2, we're going to go through the French units for the Vichy action. So each Allied major power may destroy every French-controlled unit in every hex that major power controls. If it does so, Vichy is hostile to that major power. Well, I'm pretty sure none of that is the case, so we're not going to worry about that. That doesn't matter. All remaining French-controlled land and aircraft units in a hex Free or Vichy France doesn't control are placed anywhere on the production circle. Okay, so what that basically means is that, yeah, in a hex free or Vichy France doesn't control. So what we would say is like there's a French unit, there's the fighter in occupied France. That's not Vichy or free controlled. So it's going to go onto the production circle, and I'm just going to set them over just right here where they're out of the way because they're going to come off the board relatively quickly, I believe. So yeah, all remaining French-controlled land and aircraft units in a hex free or Vichy doesn't control France doesn't control are placed anywhere on the production circle. It doesn't really matter where. On map, French minor country units are also placed there if they are not in their minor country. So we do have a case where there's a Moroccan unit in Morocco. It gets to stay where it is. And then likewise, the units that are in the region of Vichy France right now that were there, the mountain unit, cavalry, and the garrison in Vichy itself, they get to stay, at least for the moment. Okay, moving on. All remaining French-controlled naval units in a port free or Vichy France doesn't control are moved by Vichy's controlling major power to the nearest Vichy or free French-controlled ports where they may stack within double their range. So if I look at that, I mean, there aren't any French units in any other ports. All the French naval units are in French Vichy or Free French ports. So nothing I need to change there. The same major power, and I think that's referring to Vichy's controlling major power, now returns to base every French-controlled unit at sea, even those face down, to the nearest Vichy or Free French hexes within range in which they may stack. Controller's choice of more than one. If no such hex exists, it is destroyed instead. Okay, so there's really only a few French units that are in that state. So we have this guy, nearest Vichy or Free French port is going to be Toulon with the rest of these guys. So we'll put them there. And then we have the guys in the Eastern Med, which likewise, I mean, the only place they can really go is back here. So that's all done up. So there's a decent stack here. There we go. So the French fleet is back in a Vichy port. They are going to be Vichy controlled basically because of that, at least for now. So the French fleet is technically out of the war for the moment, which is good for the Axis. There's some optional rules, and we'll skip past the next paragraph since we're not playing with any options. The major power controlling Vichy now places all remaining French-controlled non-naval units that are on the production circle to any hex in their home country in which they can stack. Now what's interesting about this is that it's all remaining French-controlled non-naval units on the production circle. I'm trying to, that, like, even the ones that aren't totally built out yet, so, like, the ones over here. I mean, I guess that makes sense, right? So the Senegalese militia goes into Senegal, in Dakar. And we've got the Marseille militia in Marseille. We've got the Bordeaux. Oh, can't do that. So this militia is out because that's occupied French territory. And then we've got a garrison, fighter, and I guess put them down here or something. I don't know. Yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, just putting units down where they can go me making it easy here, just to throw them on the board. So a bunch of units came off and are in Vichy France. I believe that's where they can go. Yeah, all remaining French-controlled non-naval units in their home country, which they can stack, which would be Vichy France, I believe, is how we would do that. All remaining French-controlled markers on the production circle and marker track are destroyed. Well, we don't have any of that because we're playing the classic game, simple stuff. All units controlled by France that are still in Vichy-controlled hexes are now controlled by Vichy. All other French-controlled units are free French. So right now, there are no free French units on the board at all. So there you go. We do have a transport that's in Morocco. I believe that gets to stay in Morocco as Vichy-controlled. Now removed from the game, all French-controlled mill whose city is not controlled by Vichy. Okay, that's easy. We can do that. And then half the remaining French-controlled militia and res units, reserve units on the map, are destroyed, and the rest placed in the reserve pool. So, are any of these reserve units? No. 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 That militia's fine. No. No. And, oh, yeah, okay. So we do have a reserve unit. So, yeah, half the remaining mill and res on the map are destroyed and placed in the reserve pool. So if the total number of mill and garrisons is 2, half of that is 1. We're going to get rid of 1 unit. We'll get rid of the reserve. So that's going to be out. Oh, and the rest are placed in the reserve pool, so we're going to put him in the reserve pool. It's fine. Similarly, half Vichy's other land and aircraft units are destroyed. Taken together, rounded up. Okay, so taken together, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we are going to get rid of 4. So we can get rid of all the planes and the garrison, I guess. I'm not sure why. The fact that all this stuff is just going down the force pool is what kind of matters here. Okay. In all cases, the player running Vichy chooses which units are destroyed. However, the player controlling Free France decides whether destroyed units are scrapped. French-controlled naval units on the production circle and in the reserve pool. We have stuff in the construction pool, I guess. In the repair pool or in the construction pool remain there as Vichy units. They may be built using whatever production Vichy retains. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, randomly remove half the units now in each French force pool from the game. All territorial... Oh, that's extra rule. All units left in the force pools or that enter from now on are free French units. So everything left in the force pool is going to be free French, but they're not going to have a whole lot of production to build it. It'll be up to the Allies to give them production to be able to build them until France is liberated. If the de Gaulle HQ is not in a hex controlled by Free France or in the Free French force pool, put it there. Okay, so I'm going to take myself off camera. I'm going to finish organizing some of the counters and stuff, and we'll take care of that. There are some French convoys, actually, that I forgot to deal with. So these would be also in the port of Marseille. Force there. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, so I took care of that, and now we're done with the Vichy stuff, technically, the setup. So how does Vichy work from here on out? Well, Vichy may only declare war on major powers it is hostile to, had the Allies decide, had units in places or had French units in their countries, and they decided to mess with those guys, then they would be hostile to Vichy. Vichy could declare war. Vichy is run by Germany. The Axis powers can't declare war on Vichy. And the Allies can declare war on Vichy, but that, the Allies could do it, but they've got to be prepared to do it, because if they declare war and they become hostile to the Vichy French areas, then the Germans and the Italians can reinforce them and sort of take control of the area, so we've got to be careful with that. Vichy does not choose an action type. Instead, it uses the same action type as the major power that installed it, and they, moving those units count against the activity limits of that power, so that's kind of a tough thing. It's kind of hard to use these guys. Let's see. And it's really tough to move. It's like they are neutral, so it takes one naval move to move one naval unit, for instance. So they're treated like a neutral power, basically. While Vichy is neutral, no Axis major power can enter any of their controlled hexes. There's an exception, basically, that like if there's enemies nearby, you can move into like one adjacent hex, potentially. It's kind of hard to do, kind of hard to deal with. And yeah, and technically Vichy is not active because of this. They're like, again, treated like neutral. So we can't even send German units with an HQ with foreign troop commitment because they're not active. If Vichy was hostile to the Allies, then we potentially could. Vichy production, so Vichy can use its resources and factories to produce Vichy units. They don't have a whole lot of resources or factories, but they can build some stuff, so that's possible. And then we get into the final part that's really important for the Axis moving forward, which is the Vichy collapse rule. So this is rule 17.4.5. Vichy will collapse if occupied France is liberated, so the Allies getting into Paris and whatnot, or the major power that installed Vichy just decides it in a declaration of war step. So at the beginning of an impulse, they would say, I'm collapsing Vichy. If Vichy collapses, it ceases to exist. All Vichy-controlled hexes in Vichy France become controlled by occupied France if it still exists, or French home country hexes if it doesn't. So basically, if the Allies liberate Paris, then Vichy collapses, and all of southern France joins back up with the liberated France, basically. But Vichy will exist, occupied France exists because it's still conquered by Germany. So if we did it soon, as in, the next turn, all of that territory down here would become part of occupied France. So the Germans would get control of it. Each other home country or territory controlled by Vichy is immediately conquered by any Axis major power that has a land unit in it. Again, for that to happen, I figured out the logic of this with the help of folks online. That means we basically would have had the Allies trying to invade Vichy territory, and while we've got guys there, we collapse Vichy, and then we just take control of the minor country. We're not really in a position to do that here. All other Vichy-controlled home countries and territories become aligned to the major power that controlled it in 1939. So basically, if somehow Vichy controlled some minor country, it would go back to the original owner when it collapses. And if it's not, if it's just a territory like Algeria, it's going to be, they're going to go to Free France, basically. So as soon as we collapse Vichy, we're going to get Vichy France, but then North Africa would go right back to the Free French forces, so back to the Allies. And Free France can cooperate with the Commonwealth, I believe, which means that the Allies can get in there and help out a little bit more. If Free France were completely conquered, when Vichy collapses, she is back in the game and must choose one of her aligned minor countries as the new home country. Probably not going to happen because we're not going to have conquered the mid-Congo or Cameroon by that point. Finally, as I'm turning the page here, there's some example text that I'm not going to bother reading out loud, doesn't matter. All Vichy land and aircraft units now in Axis-controlled hexes are moved to the Free French pool. So all these units over here are going to go to the force pools. All the land and aircraft units. So they just go poof, basically. All Vichy land and aircraft units on the turn record chart are also moved to the force pool. So they're all like reset, right? They don't finish building, they're just going to reset. Let's see. All other Vichy land and aircraft units are free French, so anything that somehow is out and about might go free French. If no Axis major power controls Vichy France at the moment of Vichy collapse, all Vichy markers and naval units on the turn record chart become free French. Otherwise, Vichy pilots on the markers track are destroyed. We're not using pilots, it doesn't matter. And all other naval units on the turn record chart are controlled by that Axis major power. All on-map Vichy naval units are now free French. Those in a hex controlled by an Axis major power, like the port of Toulon. This is what's going to happen to the French fleet when we collapse Vichy. Those in a hex controlled by the Axis major power, which would be Germany because they collapse Vichy, are treated as if surprised during overrun, which means we'll roll a die and the ship is either captured by Germany, is destroyed, or it manages to get away. It's almost 50-50 chance there between bad things for the Allies and good things for the Allies in terms of the guy getting away. Each on-map Vichy marker becomes controlled by the major power that controls its hex. We're not really using markers because we're playing classics, so it doesn't really matter. If an Allied unit enters Vichy France before Vichy has collapsed, then Vichy France becomes hostile. Blah, blah, blah. Only other things to really worry about here is that combat with Vichy is really rough, so if the Allies did attack a Vichy nation, there's a chance that the Vichy units would defect. We're probably not going to give them that opportunity, but it is possible. Basically, you roll a die, and it's almost like a naval unit being overrun. You roll a die, they might go poof and be destroyed, they might stay and remain. And yeah, I think that's all the pertinent rolls we need to worry about for Vichy France. So there you go, guys. Vichy is the Vichification, if that's a word, probably not, but there you go. The Vichification of France is complete. There are units in Vichy France. There's just a handful of them. The French force pools are minimal. There's hardly anything left in it. In fact, entire unit types are unbuildable because there's nothing in the free French force pool. The force pool is free French. And the New Year additions for France will go into the free French pool. They're not going to be able to build a whole lot unless the U.S. or the Commonwealth lends them build points to do so. Basically, they don't even have any factories. They don't have any resources. So France is basically out of the game. Vichy can do a little bit, but what we're probably going to see happen is the Axis will collapse France immediately. This will clear this whole section, and they'll be able to move south and do whatever they want over here. Okay, so I think that does it for that piece, and really that's the end of the turn. So we're going to start looking at then November, December of 1940 next, so the very last turn before we get into 41, where obviously the game is going to change a little bit because the U.S. is planning to get into the war by the end of that year, and Russia is wondering what's going to happen. The whole situation is going to evolve very quickly here, just as soon as we start the next turns. So, catch you in the next one, guys.